Hey, this is David McLaughlin. Thank you for listening to the Modern Leader podcast today. I'd like to ask you a favor, but don't worry, it's free. If you can do us the favor of wherever you listen to this podcast, whether it's YouTube or Apple or Spotify or Amazon or wherever else, if you can go out there and rate it for us, just give us a nice high rating. And if you even better, leave a comment telling what you love about the show, that really helps us and it doesn't cost you a dime. Okay, let's get to the program. I am super happy today to have Bill Fournet on the program. I've known Bill for several years. We just keep running into each other at various places. But Bill's an expert on beating burnout. And I really wanted to have him on so we could talk about this. I know it affects so many people. So I'm sure you're going to get some great information and help on that topic today. Get ready to meet Bill Fournet, the modern leader. Bill Fournet is president and CEO of the Persimmon Group, the award-winning management consulting firm he founded in 2004. Bill has been a project leader for more than 25 years in the IT, engineering, manufacturing, and business change areas. He has led or overseen large and mega projects in excess of $10 billion. So, Bill, I'll have to ask you about my personal finances since you're up in that $10 billion area. Sometimes he's called the navigator of chaos and loves to solve complex problems for organizations of all sizes. From technology to generational issues, Bill analyzes workforce trends to help you stay ahead in uncertain times. Bill, I am excited to have you on the program today. How you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing great, David. How about yourself?
I'm fantastic. I've got
Oh,
a little allergy coffee going on, but I'll be
yeah, I know
fine.
how that is. I know how that is.
Bill, I always think like how did I meet the guest? And it's a little tricky with you. I can remember how long we've known each other, but we just keep running into each other at conferences and things like
Okay.
that. You're speaking, I'm speaking, and so we just keep running into each other. But I've probably been at least 10 years, I'm sure, maybe probably more.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right. 15. Probably
yeah,
back to 2010 at least, I'd say. Yeah, you're right. From
yeah.
conferences and just the same circles in some of the aspects around the state. So,
Right. Well, your organization, Persimmon Group. I'll ask you about them in just a
yeah.
second, but you are always a fantastic speaker. You have a great presence. You do well in speaking. You bring data. You bring research, all that, and so I really appreciate all of that about you. So tell us a little bit about the Persimmon Group.
Sure. So we're a management consulting firm, which means what, right? We do everything from project management, training and development, coaching and advising. And then my specific areas are I do a lot of executive coaching, both in teams and individuals. I do strategic planning, and then do the speaking as you alluded to. And then I advise clients. So Persimmon itself does consulting, process reengineering, organizational effectiveness, a lot of project management with clients, and then we teach, coach, and work side by side with clients to make those things happen.
Yeah, it's a great organization and a great team you've got there, and I always
It
love
is.
hanging around the Persimmon people. Um, Tell us a little bit about how you got here. I always say, like, where'd you grow up? What you
Sure.
doing? Like, how did you get to this place?
I'll give you the really fast pass of it. It's a journey. So I'm a big believer that it's all about the journey. I
Yeah,
was originally from Louisiana, grew up then in Enid, Oklahoma, went to college at Vanderbilt, and then did also Oklahoma State, where my master's is. So my BA is from Vanderbilt, my master's OSU. After a year in Oklahoma, I was like, hey, I got to get to a place where I want to be. And that was Seattle, Washington back then because of the grunge and Pearl Jam and Nirvana. Moved
yeah,
out there, didn't know a soul, lived in a hotel, ended up getting a job working at a restaurant, was running it in a few months, and lived in Seattle for 3 years. My wife, Christy, who I'd met in my year at OSU, came out with me as well. And we lived out there working a lot of different jobs. not making a lot of money, but having a lot of life experiences and just unbelievable enjoyment. Went back, finished my master's, was going to teach. My master's is in history, not a lot of teaching jobs back in 1995. So ended up running into a friend of my wife's and ended up in New York working for IBM at NTV, downtown New York. And lived up there for 3 years, both with IBM and then also in AT&T's consulting wing in New Jersey. I was an independent consultant there. And then we started having kids. We wanted to be close to family. Our family's in Oklahoma. So we moved to Tulsa in 1998. And I was in corporate with Williams Communications, I built a team of 150 for a large IT project. And then, based on this topic as well, burned out after about 2.5 years. So really learned a lot from that. Stepped away in 2001, did independent consulting for a little bit, started Persimmon in 2004. And I've been on that ride ever since. So it's been a great ride. Like you said earlier, it's an amazing team. I mean, that's what I'm most proud of. I started the company because I love building teams, and I love helping customers, whether they were inside of when I was in corporate or now as clients. I like them being able to overcome and work through tough problems so that they can get more time in their life to spend with their family or their friends or whatever that may be. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning, is getting it so that people can spend time doing the things they want to do, not necessarily always the things they have to do.
Nice. As you were talking about Seattle, I was thinking, I was wearing my Seattle hoodie. I love Seattle. It's such a cool city, very inclusive and diverse, and it's just a great place. But I was there a couple years ago. We flew up there. Me and my son flew up there, and then we took an Alaskan cruise from Seattle. But I stayed in Seattle about a week. Besides that, in fact, I had left a pair of glasses in Brandy Carlisle's restaurant. So
Nice.
they're
No,
still in
it's a really unique place, and at that time frame, especially, it was really special. It was not quite as big as it is now, but just the vibe, everything was so interconnected. There was just you would see. I ran a bookstore for a period in time there. I'd have Chris Cornell from Soundgarden coming in, and Eddie from Pearl Jam, and those were bands I loved, and I went and moved out there. So it was pretty special time.
Yeah. Well, here in a little bit, we'll talk about the Music Minute. So we'll talk a little bit about that some more. So I saw, as I was looking at your website a while back, that you have lots of keynotes on different topics. One of those was beating burnout. I've been wanting to have somebody on for a while to talk about burnout. What made you put that content together, and what was your interest in burnout?
So there were a couple of things. First is that really for the past 15 years, starting in about 2010, I started focusing both in speaking, but also in all of my coaching and advising around leading through times of uncertainty and disruption. The speed of change has been so fast, and I did not see it slowing down. Right. And so I was trying to look at how do you manage through that? And one of my little mantras in that space is that change is constant, but chaos is a choice. So there are environments, there are parts of our society that are dealing with constant change, but they don't meet it with just fire drills or hair on fire all the time. They actually can meet it with some stability once you get to the point of accepting that change is going to be constant. So that I was watching and then seeing the buildup that was occurring in my clients around the burnout and the stress side. It also, for me, was very personal because I left corporate. I gave 6 months notice in September of 2000 to leave in March of 2001 because I was burned out. I was not making good decisions. I was going to work. It was 80-hour weeks. It would be dark when I went in and dark when I went home. And we had our second son, and I hardly even knew him. And so I knew some things in my life had to change. And that was kind of that looking in the mirror. And what I find with burnout is that it cuts across everyone. So it doesn't matter what level in the organization you are now. It also is because between technology, communication channels, the amount of things coming at us, the joke is ice cream, we had vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry, and then Baskin Robbins came along and blew all of our minds with 31 flavors and toppings. It was cool on one hand, but then it also became a challenge from a decision fatigue, which is one of the key things that can lead you towards stress or burnout. And so that's why I built the topic. I wanted to be able to hit people where everyone has their own struggle or challenge in this journey, and to say, what could you do to either prevent or reduce it? And then if you're feeling that you really are in that place, what can you do to take action on it so you don't just look up in 10 years and realize, how did I get here?
Yeah. Yeah. Talking about experiencing burnout, um, I had a role where for 3 years I worked 80 hours a week without any hyperbole every single week for 80 hours for 3 years. And at the end of it, I was toast. And I left corporate a few years ago. And I feel like just now, like 3 years later, I'm just now starting to recover
Yeah,
from all of
it does
that.
take a while.
It's shocking. Is there an official definition of what burnout is? How do people know what it is, and how do they know what the signs are?
Yeah.
Maybe before it gets out
Yeah,
of
yeah. So,
control.
yeah. So, kind of the definition, the one that I use that's out there is that burnout's a state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion caused by long term. And that's a key part. I'm going to separate that, say, from just stress or anxiety um,
Right.
in emotionally demanding situations. And so, to me, when you look at stress or anxiety, it's usually short lived, it's got an end date. Like, this is going to be a bad month or a bad week or weekend. You got to
Right.
work through it. It's usually pretty situational. It's where that you can kind of almost like push through it. It's going to be kind of a grind, but there's light at the end of the tunnel. You'll lose your physical energy, but you can like sleep. This is where teenagers are great, right? They can sleep in on the weekend and regain that energy to get going. So when you think about like back in college or sometimes high school, and you're studying for finals, that is stress.
Yeah.
The difference with burnout is when you get to the point, and there's a few big signs around that, but one of those is a complete lack of joy. You cannot
Yeah.
find joy in things. You find yourself going through the motions. There's some physical signs on this, but this is what you can also watch for. If you're a manager or leader and you're watching your team, you're seeing people who start disengaging that were engaged previously. And that's a big sign. So they're not like being critical or arguing. That's a sign of stress. You can react on stress. But in burnout, you're getting into where you just kind of go numb. And what happens on that is because you get into this guilt feeling at times that I am caught between a rock and a hard place. I am needing my job. I need my income. I may be the sole breadwinner at times. And so in that case, you're like, I can't quit. I can't let go. But what I found with burnout was you kind of just wake up in the morning and you kind of say, okay, well, I'm going to go into work. And then I come home and you watch TV, you do something mellow, and you go to bed and you just rinse and repeat. And you find yourself in this really bad rhythm. Physically, headaches and illness are two big signs, like constantly getting sick because your immune system can get shot in a burnout environment. So I've got clients where, they start having challenge in their sleep patterns. They get sick every time there's the drop of something happen, and they feel that they start having these headaches or migraines that weren't expected.
What's interesting is you're talking and you're describing all that. I'm literally sitting here almost having like PTSD, uh, like a
Yeah.
reaction just from like, yes, yes, yes. I remember, and you can feel it in your body. You're talking about the help. I was on a bunch of drugs. I was on blood pressure, migraine,
Yeah.
I don't know what, all kinds of stuff. And what's interesting is over the last 3 years, the only thing I'm taking now is an allergy pill and a multivitamin every morning. I have gotten off of all of that stuff. And so, as you're talking about it, just like
Yeah.
flooding back what it felt like.
Well, and
But
that's the hard part too, is that for a lot of people, it's kind of like blind spots. They don't realize that they're in burnout. They thought they were just in stress. And I'll tell you and so somebody has to kind of give them a sign on that. But I'll tell you what it was for me. So I would have a recurring nightmare almost every night. And it was that I was skiing. I love skiing. I was skiing down a mountain and there was an avalanche behind me and it was coming. And I knew I had to keep my skis, my tips pointed down, and could ski as fast as I could. And at the end, I would try to stop because I knew that if I stopped or turned around and looked at the avalanche, I was going to be consumed by it. And that was my recurring dream. And it was this idea of you just got to keep pushing forward, because if you stop and reflect, you're going to get consumed by the amount of overwhelm coming at you. And that was a really bad place to be. And so for me, the second part was I realized I was not making good decisions. And I had a team of 150 people, and I did not want to take my entire team down. And so I started reflecting and said, okay, I've got to change some things here. What am I going to do? And I made my decision, okay, that I am going to stop the role that I was in and the direction I was going. And then I wanted to make it do it in a way that was not going to negatively impact my team or the company that I was in. And that's why I gave my 6 months notice when I did. And it changed immediately. It was like a weight off the shoulder. But it was then now me trying to focus on legacy, which is a very positive, almost anti-burnout approach. And that left me in a good place when I left that organization.
I just got distracted because I love your bookshelf, and I happened to notice the Truman book behind you. That's one of my all-time favorite books. And David McCullough is just, and I read that book. That's the book that got me into history. This is totally parentheses for everybody, but that's the book that really got me into history. And when I finished reading it, it was so powerful. The only time in my life I've ever done this, I wrote him a letter, sent it to his publisher, telling him how meaningful it was. And then as soon as I mailed it, I was like, well, that's dumb. Like, he's never going to see that. A few months later, I got a handwritten card from David McCullough thanking me for that. And then the next day he won a Pulitzer Prize for Truman. So
that's awesome. No, that's really cool. And it's amazing how books, I love history and I love reading because it gives you insights into other people's lives or situations, right? And then you try to think about, well, how would I either have handled that, or how does that relate to the work I'm doing now? And that's why those have been huge for me. I'm not a big business book reader per se. I really look at history and actions because I think about those scenarios. How would I have responded in that moment?
Yeah, same. All right. I want to talk about how organizational culture plays into this, because there's all kinds of different cultures. But I was thinking about this question. I was working with a company one time, and they were having the president of the company was talking to everybody, and it was kind of like a panel kind of thing, just asking questions. And somebody asked him about burnout, and there's so much going on in the organization. There's so much that we have to get accomplished. What's a reasonable amount of time to, work? And his answer, I'll never forget it. It haunts me. He said, well, I think people worry too much about that. Like, just when you're done at the end of the day, just go home. It's on you to go home. Part of that, I get his answer, but I felt he was so disconnected from the people in his organization that he didn't understand the pressure and burden they were under. What are your thoughts about culture?
Oh, so I agree. First, I think it does start from the top. And I think one of the things that's lacking, not just in our workplace cultures, but actually in society right now, is empathy.
Yes.
And what we see is a lot of disconnects. Working with a lot of leadership teams, one of the challenges that I've seen is that for Gen X and older, so really 1965 1980 and older, from a Gen X perspective, what I find is they have these predisposed assumptions about what people are coming into the workplace with. And if you think about it with Gen X and before, we came into a workplace that was still very performance driven. We also all kind of grew up with 3 to 4 television channels. We had a lot more common social mores, if you will, and experiences. When you go into millennials and younger, you have this massive diversity between the internet, streaming channels, YouTube. You've got the diversity of backgrounds where you can't assume that people know what good looks like. That's one of the things, or have common knowledge. And so the challenge I give to a lot of leaders, because I hear this from my younger generations, is we don't know what good looks like. And this applies to burnout and that attitude. Because what you see, especially with younger generations, is that they have gotten very savvy with how they use applications and in their phone, and also just life in general, to try to become efficient as possible. But they also sometimes may not have that perspective from how to cope or apply different approaches. And they haven't been through some tough times. Even like right now, what we're seeing, economically, we haven't had a recession really like we used to every 10 years in a long time. Yeah. So I think part of that is when we say burnout, People don't really know what that means. But I will tell you that in the younger generations, because of their focus on their friends, on mental health, they are much more attuned to seeing the signs of it. And they're much more courageous in proactively setting up boundaries, which is why you're hearing at times, those 20 somethings that will say, I'm not working in the weekend unless you're paying me overtime because you don't get me 24/7. And that is a shift in the model, because as a Gen Xer, we came of age during both computers and cell phones starting to be, and pagers, where we shifted into kind of this 24/7 access. And it was kind of cool at first. And then it's become almost weaponized. And we kind of weaponized it without knowingly. It was cool to take an email while you're a kid's musical or a football game. But now you can hit everybody up all the time. And you're often doing it for CYA and other reasons. So you're just getting overwhelmed with noise coming at you. And so that's why I think that when a CEO or a leader says that, what they've got to do is they've got to step back, sometimes almost like a parent with a child, and say, how is my organization doing? And how do I create boundaries? And sometimes even hard rules, like some companies saying no email between certain hours of the day, or if you're on vacation, right, so that you can protect your people, and they will stay with you longer. If you do that, your retention will go up. If not, and this is where I think a lot of companies are getting hit right now, is younger generations just won't put up with it. And I'm really proud of these younger generations trying to carve out those boundaries, because those are needed in life.
Yeah, absolutely. I say that all the time. People like that. You can go back like thousands of years and people were criticizing the younger generation coming up, right? Nothing has changed. But I do think there's something special and unique about Gen Z, and I love it because, like you said, they're not having it. They're just not having it, and I think we all benefit from that perspective. But
great.
I was thinking you're talking about being available and everything. One of the big wake up calls I had, I was in New Orleans, which, by the way, is I freaking love New Orleans. But I was in New Orleans with my family on vacation, and I think we had just had lunch or something. We went back to the van, and I get a text from work, and then I'm sitting there and I had to call, and my family's just sitting there in this van waiting on me, and it didn't took like 30 minutes to like solve this thing. And when I hung up, I was like, this is just wrong. Like there's something wrong. Like part of it, you love that you're needed, right? But I think that drives some of this is we want to be needed. We want to know that
we don't want to let anybody down either. I think part of it's guilt. We don't want to let somebody else down.
Yeah, right. But when you can't get away from it, that it's a problem.
Here's a challenge on that though. So this is the key part of burnout and choices. So when I work with clients on burnout, the first thing I bring up is about attitude and intentionality, because intentionality has to do with where do I want to be or what do I want to do in my choices that I make. Attitude is how I look at things. I'll give you an example on that. So I do a lot with backpacking in the Scouts, right? So I take Scouts specifically backpacking in places that don't have cell service, which is harder and harder to do, because part of that's the unwinding of things, like getting away from technology. If I told you right now I'm taking you off, we're going to go off for a company retreat, and we end up going to a place in the mountains, and you realize when you get there that you don't have cell service, and you're like, oh, whoa, what am I going to do for the next 3 days? I don't have cell service. You're going to freak out at first. You're going to be a little upset. You're going to think about, what do I do? Yeah. Then you're going to settle in. You're going to start to decompress, and you're going to be okay because you didn't have a say in that matter. But if I take you to a place, same retreat, but they do have cell service, now you have to choose.
Yeah.
It's the choice that makes it hard. So the attitude to me comes in. If you had a loved one or a spouse, say when my wife was giving birth, if I'd been on a cell phone during that process, I would have gotten slapped in the face, and rightly so. If you can trick your mind into realizing, if I was backpacking and didn't have cell service, or if I was dealing with a loved one, I can let go of the phone then you can start to let go in the future. And that's how you start to carve out time to give yourself breaks, in that case, from the technology or the access.
Love that. I talk a lot about productivity and achieving results. in my book, I contrast modern leadership with vintage leadership and what the differences are. But one thing I say is it doesn't matter if you're a vintage leader or a modern leader, you still have to get stuff done,
Yep.
right?
Right.
Organizations have to make money. If you're public, you've got to meet quarterly earnings. You've got to do all this stuff. How do leaders like be productive without, especially high performers, because the high
Yeah.
performers are the ones
Yeah.
who really fall into this. How do they go about meeting all the demands of the organization without burning themselves out?
Yeah. So, you kind of said it just a moment ago, which is that they've got to do the what of the job. They got to get things done, right?
Yeah.
Burnout and how you stave it off or prepare for it and remain productive is all based on the how. So this comes down to basic hows. The first hows are how do I prioritize work to decide what is important versus everything cannot be a number one. And I know a lot of people think that in their organization, well, everything's a number one. No, in reality, it's not. You cannot work on multiple number one things at the same time. So the question then becomes, how do we get our priorities out there and align them? The second gets into things like performance and work hacks. I'm a big Tim Ferriss fan, and a lot of techniques and ideas have been inspired by listening to his interviews of high performers talking about their routines, their approaches, and trying to find the common threads or themes between those. And I learned a lot over the years by listening to those. Because I think that there's things that you can do with productivity hacks, and that's a lot of the techniques I teach, is how do you get ahead of this so that you can actually increase your productivity in a shorter amount of time. And the key then, and this is a mistake I made early on, I had really work hacked my way into high productivity. I call it force multiplier. I was doing in 40 hours, I was doing 80 plus hours of work.
Yeah.
But my mistake was I started filling my extra time, my free time now, with more opportunities and work, more things I wanted to do. And then all it took was one or two of those work items to start having issues and rippling through. And I didn't have any white space, as I refer to it, which is space you have to yourself, unstructured. You can decide what you want to do with it. I didn't have any white space for it to bleed into. And so that was where you can get overwhelmed again. So I think the key there on how you start to prepare for it is you've got to get yourself a routine, but you've also got to set boundaries. Even if you were just an individual contributor, you have boundaries. Those boundaries are the time in the day. They're what meetings do I attend? Should I attend? And also the big one that is in most companies, that's a huge issue that can lead to losing time in your day, which can then lead to stress or burnout, is our meeting efficiency, which is unbelievably poor in the United States. 5 to 15 minutes is the answer I've gotten for 15 years of how many minutes are valuable in a 1 hour meeting. So you change some of those things, you can get time back in your day, and then you can get time to start thinking and then getting ahead.
Yeah, I sit in meetings and just despise. I think the problem is people don't know how to run a meeting properly, and it drives me out of my mind. Okay. I like to pause about halfway through or so and do what we call the music minute. I really feel like you can get to know people better by what kind of music they like. We already touched on like Nirvana and Pearl Jam, and I will say I am a huge Pearl Jam fan. I've seen them, I think, 5 times now, and they are just amazing.
We have that in common. That's why I moved to see them.
Yeah, God, I love Pearl Jam. What? Tell us about the music that you like. What are maybe some of your favorite band songs? Concerts.
Overall, if I had to select it, because it was just a very impactful period for me, was Pearl Jam is clearly my favorite band. Everything about them just spoke to me. I've seen them multiple times, like you said. Lollapalooza '92 was awesome. Bremerton with Pearl Jam and Soundgarden. And I accidentally, the place I got hired at the restaurant in Seattle, not knowing anybody, happened to be the place that Mike McCready, the lead guitar player from Pearl Jam, had worked at. So I had backstage passes at Lollapalooza '92. So that was like a little claim to fame.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Nowadays, I love diversity. So I listen to a lot of alternative music. There's a band right now that I really am enjoying. It's an Irish band called Kingfisher. It's kind of in the vein of Mumford and Sons, Head in the Heart, some of those bands. I think that's kind of a groove that I really dig for where I'm at. But I have three sons, and so I get tons of music coming in from them as well, and we all exchange playlists on Spotify and stuff too.
Yeah, that sounds like me and my kids. We're always sharing stuff, and of course, they're always into more. I listen to new music every week, and so I try and stay in touch with what's going on. But they're more into like the alternative and indie scenes and stuff. My favorite thing is when I introduce them to something that they haven't heard and they
Yeah.
love it. I'm like, yes, I scored with my kids. It's so
Well,
great.
that's what my oldest is a musician, so he's done a lot of recordings. He's put songs out on Spotify. But
Nice.
like they introduced me to Kendrick years ago, and I love listening to
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Childish Gambino, that kind of stuff has also been really good.
yeah, yeah. Well, let's plug your kid. What's his name so people can go listen?
Oh, Douglas Fournet. He's had a couple of different monikers that he's done for his albums,
Uh-huh.
but it's Douglas Fournet out on Spotify. He's got three albums that are out there, um,
Nice.
and
I'll check him out.
he plays every instrument, so he's really talented.
That's cool. That's cool. Well, I love that. See, I feel like we know you better already just from digging into that.
Music's really
Okay.
like it is, I think, for you too. I mean, I music for my wife, myself, my family. Like we are a music household of. It just kind of gives you it helps to bring color into the day.
Yeah. Yeah. My family too. Like everybody, we were all, and going back generations, like very musical family. So I love that. Okay. So we've talked kind of about how we get bogged down into burnout. Let's figure out how to get out of it. What are some things people can do to maintain those boundaries, prevent it in the first place? Give us some help, Bill.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of different things. I mentioned earlier about prioritization. And prioritization can get into how often I check my email. It's choices that I make because sometimes we fall into this trap where we're so used to instant response or gratification. One of the things that starts to really that you can, if you're a leader, you can really help your team with too is slow down the rhythm or the cadence of things.
Mhm.
Look at things like the meetings that you have and can I reduce them? I do a technique called zero meeting budgeting, essentially, which is
Yeah.
that you go back and you review your recurring meetings on an annual basis and decide, do I really need them still? Are they still providing the value? I'm a big believer of shortening meetings to 30 minutes unless
Yep.
really then there is a justification for longer meetings. But looking at that, how do I get more time back? Second thing that I do a lot of with people that are in burnout or trying to get the priority set is establishing what I call white space. And so one of the things I don't think people do enough of right now in the workplaces, they don't use their calendars appropriately. So, oftentimes now calendars have become meetings, and then you end up with what I call Tetris schedule, like the old game where you've got, 3 to 4 meetings stacked up at the same time, and you're like, oh, which one do I want to go to?
Right. Right.
Use your calendar to get control of your time. So white space is typically starting out, I say schedule 2 hours a week. It can be 2 1-hour sessions or a 2-hour block during work hours that are for you to have things queued up. Unstructured time. Could be reading articles, could be thinking about your team, could be reflecting on how to get better at something, watching a YouTube video. It's 2 hours for you to improve. And this is something we've really lost in the workplace, and I can trace it back to 2001. We've lost the idea that development and thinking are important in the workplace. It's all about doing, get her done, get her done.
Yeah.
And so I had this experience where I'd been on a project for 4 years, traveling 4 days a week, and coming back to my office from that project, sitting down and reading an article in a trade magazine and thinking, my team's out there working and I'm not working. And then I thought, wait, when did thinking not become working?
Right.
White space to me is really important. And I want you to think about this. So 2 hours a week, or most people are working about 50-hour weeks, let's say. That is 4% of your week is spent for unstructured time. So what I recommend on doing that is schedule it. You have to own it like you're meeting with your boss or your boss's boss so that you honor your
Right.
time commitment to yourself. Put it on your calendar, name it whatever you need to so people maybe don't conflict with another meeting.
Right.
And then have a place where you queue up things. It could be articles or books or things I just want to work on, almost like a to-do list, and then use that to get through there. So that's another.
Or let me add this. Or not reading or learning anything, just thinking about what's going on in your work and what needs to
Right.
happen.
It can be
I had
reviewed a document if you needed to. I mean, whatever that is to
Yeah.
focus, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, years ago, I heard this guy. He was like a real estate guy, and he was telling about he's got his den at home with all his books and everything, and a friend of theirs came over to the house and was talking to his wife, and she goes, "Oh, I see. I can't remember his name. Him in there in his study. He leaned back in the recliner, just not do anything." And she goes, "Oh, that's nice that he doesn't have to work right now." And his wife said, "Oh no, he's working very hard right now. He's thinking." And I love
All
that
right.
because just
That's great.
thinking
Great example.
is
Yes,
work, but
it
you have
is.
to have, as you're talking, the space to think.
It is. And so I think as a leader, little mistakes that I see that they're not doing enough of is transition times between meetings. So whether it's a drive time during the pandemic, we really kind of got bad at this. We just stacked everything back to back. And meetings, in my opinion, have also become weaponized. They become the replacement of reply all emails. Invite everybody
Yeah,
so
right.
nobody can complain they weren't invited. So picking and choosing which ones you believe you need to really attend, and then stepping back and getting control of your transition time. I still use transition times, even if I'm not having to physically go from one place to another. It allows me to have that time to finish out my thoughts from the previous meeting, maybe get an email out or a recap, and then move into my next one. So
Yeah.
those are all things. And then outside of that, David, there's a number of things that I find that are good work hacks. I'm a big fan of the Pomodoro technique,
Yeah.
which is about, it's coming, homeschoolers have leveraged that too. It's the idea of intense focus and really time boxing, removing your time into 25-minute increments, removing distractions, getting heads down. And when you start to do that, you start to build almost like a muscle that you didn't have that allows you to go into a time box or into a Pomodoro very fast. Because I believe that also what has really eroded our ability to have high productivity and make us more sensitive to burnout is we aren't focusing well enough. And so by bringing in focus, I can get more done in a short period of time. And that's getting the brain into something that I'm a big fan of called the flow.
Yeah.
And the flow is how do you maximize your brain's performance, productivity. And a book I read years ago called The Rise of Superman, which studied extreme athletes, is a great, I learned so much from that book because from it's how do you now get your brain tricked into the flow as fast as possible, which means you are at peak mental performance as quickly as possible, which means you're getting more done than most of your counterparts in a shorter period of time. And that frees up time.
Yeah, I'm big into mindfulness, and
Okay.
it's that whole idea of eliminating distractions and learning how to eliminate distractions so you can get into that deep work, that flow. And when any interruption breaks it, it takes like I can't remember, but something like 18 minutes to get back into that deep
Right.
flow. So if our phones are buzzing and people are coming by our cubicle, it just completely interrupts that deep work capacity.
That's right.
Um, I didn't have this planned, but since we're talking about this, and that just hit my brain. What are your thoughts on like open space uh,
Yeah.
offices? There's pros and cons to it, I know, but what are
Sure,
your
sure. So, when all that was coming down generationally, part of that was a trend, right? Because you look at Gen Z, especially, and Xers, they both would like private time. They want focus time. So, what I believe you need to have is it's good to have a balance. There are areas where you want open areas that people can go work in. Sometimes they just like the energy of it, even if they're not engaging. It can be collaborative. But you've got to have places also where people can go for deep work, like you just said. And that is, over the past 5 years, one of the questions was getting asked a lot from the leadership teams were, hybrid work. How many days of the office do you think we should be in? And I said, that's not the question we should be asking. What we should be asking is when do you or your team need to be on, meaning available for others?
yeah
Different departments, different needs, right? Because what you have to balance is that between that and your deep work aspects. And so as a leader or manager, are your people morning people? Who's a night owl? Who likes to work? When are they at their peak performance? And how do you work schedules around deliverables, since we're much more deliverables based in most organizations, not all, like we still have shifts and other things out there.
yeah
Are we having those conversations to say, when are we on and when are we out? And like you said just a moment ago, that point about removing of distractions, especially during deep work and honoring people's time, is really important because I've got so many leaders that have, over the past several years, have asked their CIOs or their IT departments to say, can you track how long people are in teams so I can
Right.
track, see how productive they are? If that's what your leadership team is asking, they are asking the wrong questions. That's not how you measure things. And the thing that people know is your employees know, they know that if that's what you're going to measure them on, they will figure out how to show up to make the number or the data point be whatever you want it to be.
Yeah.
As a manager and a leader, if you want to be successful, it's getting to know your people and helping you all as a team achieve your results, but satisfying it with the strengths and the needs of the people that you have.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I'm like personally like a big believer in working from home because I think that uh it's about managing productivity, not managing activity.
That's right.
But I interviewed a journalist on this podcast last season, I think. And one of the things she said was like this is like back in the like 80s or 90s. She was working in the office. Back then everybody was in the office. So they were working in the office and she was sitting next to a guy who's like a legend in journalism. And she said, I learned so much just
Yeah.
listening to him on the phone. And I think that is one of the reasons people want people back, because there is this synergy that we get from being around others, and we can learn just almost by osmosis, just being around other people.
It
So
is. You're right. And that is actually something we're hearing a lot from Gen Z on. They don't want to be in the office every day, but they do want to be in the office because that sort of intrinsic knowledge sharing that's occurring is really important in those conversations. And you get this idea of spontaneity. And so you want this balancing act. People who are leaning more towards introverted, they're much more okay just being holed up solo. People that are more extroverted, they need that energy and that soundboarding collaboration that you're getting. So you want to find your balances, which goes back to intentionality. And are you thinking about the meetings and how you're approaching them? And are you being intentional in setting up the spaces that allow people to either hit their individual deep work, collaborate a team, and then trusting them to work together? These younger generations are so much savvier at this because they have been working in teams since they were in middle school.
Right. Yeah. Video games. They learn teamwork in video games and stuff. So it's fascinating. All right.
Yep.
So, there's a lot of high performers who they want to get stuff done. They want to move up in their career. They have this need to just like keep doing more and more. And then they do realize at some point, like, this isn't sustainable. But then they're like kind of sacked with guilt. Like, whether it's the way they were brought up or just what they've developed over time. What do we do about the guilt?
Yeah. So let me start first on the first part of that, which is the awareness of, am I overwhelmed, right? That's a big one. So one of the little things that we do in my company is that when people come in the first time, because we're a pretty flat organization, is that there's not the governors that you normally would see in most corporate environments to slow you down, like your decisions if you want to go do something. Right. The one thing we watch, especially with younger employees, is when do they take on too much work and become overwhelmed, and when do they start to realize it? So that's like your cup is filling up with water, right? When do you realize you've poured too much water in your cup?
Yeah.
And we do that purposefully to let them kind of actually fail, and then debrief to say, when did you realize you were overwhelmed? Because you need to start recognizing that own indicator. And that's hard when you come into your career initially. The second part of that is because also you have a lot of people who've gotten promoted because they're heroes. They're the firefighters. They're who I put into the crisis. At times, those people can actually thrive and create crises to become heroes. So all that said, what do you do afterwards when they've either recognized it or you're recognizing it in them? I think there's two things that most managers and leaders really miss the mark on with this. And I've already brought up prioritization, so I'm not going to go into that one. But the number one is delegation. They're not thinking about how to delegate. Many of them have this attitude, especially Gen Xers, of if you want to get it done right, just do it yourself. So they know that they're gonna get all this stuff coming from their team and on status reports, let's say, and on Thursday night, they're going to clean them all up and then send them up the food chain. Stop that. Change the equation and ask yourself, how do I get my team to produce better status reporting to me so I can just copy and paste and not have to manipulate it before it goes up? The second one, which is one I really focus a lot on, especially with mid-managers, is It's recognizing that you have to develop your team. And
Yeah.
so, as a middle manager, I believe that delegation is actually one of the best ways to develop team members. But here's where they fail. Right now, with most managers, the number one miss that I see is that, and I hear from them, is they are jumping to conclusions about a person's behavior or why they're hearing certain words versus asking themselves, did this person understand what I asked them to do? Do they have the capability or the experience to do that? And if they don't, how do I coach them through that through exposure or training or knowledge transfer? So I believe that as a manager or leader, if you start to step back and look at your team, I kind of put them into their work into some buckets. Bucket number one is, can they do the transactional job? Can they, if you ask them to do X, can they go do X with quality and completeness? So you don't have to look over your shoulder to know it got done. The second stage starts to move into things like analysis. Are they starting to see things in their job and they're raising up points to you? Hey, this customer said this to me and they've said it a few times. The third moves into design or response or actioning, which says, what should I do with what I'm seeing and hearing? And then the third one is when they become even more proactive, where you don't even have to go to the manager. They just solve the issue or the need or address it on the fly. I give those because as a manager, I think that we're not thinking in enough nuance of how and where to coach a person to get them to the level I want them to be. And it's a little different. If I've got 4 wide receivers, I do 2 a days. That's consistent. We do basic drills. But then I've got the person that's the long ball receiver. I got the short route. That's what I'm trying to think about is how do I coach them for their specific position or need based on their skill? And if you do that, you can delegate more, which allows you to take some of the weight off of your shoulders and have your team help to carry that.
That's fantastic. I was writing some notes because what you were saying, I wanted to keep some of that. There was a question I was going to ask.
Well, the transactional piece to me is important because a lot of times leaders think, well, for me to delegate, you've got to be like at 100% of being able to do this job.
Right.
I'm a bigger believer of decomposing the work. If I know you can do the transactional side for me, maybe I'll have you do the transactional piece and I'll do the analysis of the report. And I may sit down and walk through with it and say, hey, what do you see in these data points?
Yeah.
But just knowing they can do what you're asking them to do, and then you start to layer on a little bit more of an ask, and then you say, and this is another thing that leaders have got to do. You got this. You don't need to come to me next time, which means, hey, I'm taking the training wheels off. You're running with this on your own. I don't need to be holding your bike every time.
Wow. Yeah, that's so good. I'm going to try to remember to put the link to, you have a burnout ebook.
I do.
It's
got some of the techniques as well.
Yeah, billfournet.com/burnout ebook. And I'll try to remember to put that in the link. But I think in that, correct me if I'm wrong, you have some like tools that they can use to kind of help leaders and employees identify and figure this out. Tell us a little bit about what's in that.
So I've also got out there too what you'll see are power plays beyond just the ebook. So power plays are what I call micro techniques or tools in your tool belt. I believe that sometimes we try to create these really long processes or procedures that just don't hold up in a changing situation. Yeah. And instead, what you need to focus on coaching judgment of reading the situation or the room and then pull out the tools in your tool belt. And so my power plays are these techniques, and some of them are related to burnout or time management. Others are around leading or meeting management. So I try to build things in there that are about getting us some better time or better use of our time in the workplace.
It's fantastic. So I always ask people how you want people to get a hold of you. But billfournet.com is where that stuff is.
It's a great one. LinkedIn as well. I have a lot of blogs. You'll see out on the billfournet.com, just like you, David, as well. A lot of blogs that are out there for different areas and situations. Because to me, with burnout, we're all going through it in our own ways. And it's just trying to say, are there some ways that I can help myself or maybe one of my team members just get better control of their time and increase that productivity without adding that stress or burnout fatigue.
Yeah, and I love the emphasis on keeping an eye out for your team members because so often we just think, well, it's your problem, you figure it out. But if we have people on our team who
Right.
are burnout, stressing out, we need to ask ourselves as leaders, what do I need to do to help that person? So I love your
Right.
emphasis on,
Right. I was really fortunate to work for a boss that was that way. He knew
yeah,
as a project manager, he said he was not one of these that you're just running at 180 miles an hour all the time. He
yeah,
said, look, you go home right now and spend time with your family because in about 3 weeks,
yeah,
this project's going to take off and you're going to load up. And sure enough, it did. But he
yeah.
understood the rhythms of business. And I so appreciated that from him.
Yeah, that's so important. Bill, this is we've been wrapping this
Yep.
up with what I call some quick questions, quick hit
Yep.
questions. So I'm just going to ask you these and see where they go. You know, we know you like music. Are you a karaoke guy? Do you have like a karaoke song?
I am not a karaoke song, but probably if I was doing one, it would probably be Black from Pearl Jam because I got married to that song too. I love that song. It's my favorite
Really, I love
all-time
that.
song.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's cool. I love it. Can you sing? Do you sing?
Can I sing physically? Sure. Does it sound where an audience would want to listen to it? No, but that's why I have a son who can and does. But
Perfect.
I still love singing in the car all the time.
Yeah, you outsourced it. That's great.
Exactly.
So if you, let's say the world is in a massive food crisis and you can only eat one type of food the rest of your life, what would you eat?
So it would be my Aunt Sue's crawfish etouffee. You don't mess with the recipe. It's also the last meal I would ever have. It is a simple recipe, but you don't ever mess with it, and it's amazing.
Listen, the reason I love going to New Orleans is the best food in the world is in Louisiana, and I will fight anybody to tell me differently. That sounds fantastic. What's the last book you've read? Is there a book you've read recently that maybe the last one or a really good one that stands out to you?
So I went back and read Tribes again by
Uh-huh.
Sebastian Younger. Very much have enjoyed that one. I've been a big fan of Stanley McChrystal. I'll tell you from a business and leadership place though, I am a fan of a dichotomy of leadership by Jocko Willink, who's a Navy SEAL. I do a lot of military reading in a sense because it's colorful, it's clear, it works at all levels of command. I think about okay, how might some of those things apply into business, and some of my techniques are based on that. But I really like dichotomy of leadership because it gives you all the chapters are based on things like when to lead, when to follow, when to be rigid, when to be flexible. And it was one of the most engaging books where as I'm reading it, I'm asking, how would I address that situation? How would I have done that? And that got me thinking in my workplace and with my teams and my clients, what would I do?
Yeah, that's great. You know, it's interesting. I talk about in the modern leadership context that there's so much great research and work done in the military on leadership, and we've picked that over and dropped sometimes all of it and too much into the corporate world. But the corporate world isn't designed the same as the military, so you have to figure out
That's right.
what to take and what to ignore because
That's
they have a
exactly it.
particular function and purpose that is not the function and purpose
No,
of the
you're
corporate.
right. And that's what I started studying because I always believe the military, when in combat, leads 10 to 15 years ahead of corporate. That's what command and control came out
Right,
too.
right, right.
So I was watching, O2, O3, O4, O5, the stuff that was coming out. And you're exactly right. That's why a lot of times a challenge for those from the military coming into corporate, they don't recognize some of the nuances in corporate and it can drive them nuts.
Yeah,
And it's doing what you just said. It's finding the base techniques that can be applied, that can be helpful, but also recognizing the differences in business, say, versus the military.
yeah. I always say that's sometimes why the corporate world feels like a battlefield because they're using those techniques.
Yes, it does.
What's your guilty pleasure TV show? Do you have something that just like
Well, most recently, I finished Severance, which I love.
so good?
Right.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about Andor season 2 about to start as well, and then we just finished White Lotus season 3, so which I thought was actually the best season of White Lotus. I know there's a lot of debate out there on that one, but I'm a big fan of those. So I'll tell you the part though that the most interesting one recently. My wife got me exposed to this, and with everything going on in the world today, the stresses that are out there, every night we kind of need what I call a palate cleanser, something to remind you of humanity, the goodness and everything out there. And Queer Eye is what we will watch as our last show of the night, because I just think that watching them And what they do, they're so good in their specific areas. I get lessons that I can use in coaching and with clients just from that show, and it reminds you of the power of humanity.
Right. Yeah. I'm the same way. I have to have like a something light right before I go to bed
Yep.
because there's just
Same
too
thing.
much craziness going on. This is the last question. What's the
Yep.
best piece of advice you've ever received?
That's a tough one because I've gotten a lot of good advice over the years
Yeah.
that I try to incorporate. I think probably one of the most fundamental ones for me has been um, my dad, who raised me, gave me this advice, which was leave the world a little better than you found it. And
Love
I
that.
try to do that every day of my life. I try to do that with my sons. That's why I'm so active in scouting still, because it's about the legacy side. But I would say that's probably one of the most framing mantras or principles that I make decisions by as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Bill, I appreciate your time. This has been really good. I know there's a lot of burnout people out there. Hopefully, they can listen to this and prevent the burnout or take some of your great advice on how to alleviate that. The ebook is at billfournet.com/burnout-ebook. And I'll try to remember to put the link in the show notes as well. Bill, I appreciate your time. This has been great.
Hey, thank you, David. I've enjoyed it. It's been great, man.
What a great guy. So knowledgeable, so fun, so helpful. And I just believe that you got a lot out of that. I hope you did. Be sure to check him out at billfournet.com. And also, his organization is the Persimmon Group. If you need to reach out to Bill to have him come do keynote speaking for you, consult with your business, any of those things, he's a great resource. So be sure to reach out to him. You can also reach out to us at pendulumcoaching.com. We focus on leadership training, emotional intelligence, mindfulness, those topics, and I coach employees and leaders on those things as well. So be sure to reach out to us for anything you need from us at pendulumcoaching.com. This has been a great episode. I appreciate Bill. Thank you all, and we will see you next time on The Modern Leader.